Hello, I'm Tom Palmer and I'm a children's author and I write history books and as well as football books. And I'm at Greenhead Park here in Huddersfield, and this is the Greenhead Park, the Huddersfield War Memorial, which stands at the top of the park, sort of on the outskirts of the town. And it's fitting for my Remembrance film for 2022, which you are now watching, that we're in Huddersfield because my first ever history book was called Over the Line, and it is the story of the First World War, but in particular it's the story of two Huddersfield town players who gave up being footballers in 1915 and went to fight in the First World War. And I feel particularly honoured, I suppose, to be remembering to be remembering them today as part of my Remembrance film, because they were so important to me. Not just that they were my first book that I wrote about history and about war, but also because I learned so much writing about them. I learned how to write about history while I was writing this book. Because I made so many mistakes, I learned how properly to tell stories of history and respect the fallen and those that were here today to remember. But as well as British soldiers, which these two were, this year I want particularly to remember Commonwealth soldiers, flyers and sailors. And I think it's really important to remember the service people from across all the different nations of the Commonwealth in particular who took part in the First and Second World War and other conflicts. And it's really important because my research into war history, I come across countless Commonwealth stories, not just British soldiers, but soldiers from all over the world, from India to Canada and many other countries, men coming thousands of miles to fight with and alongside Britain. And that research has taught me that we need to represent these people in the stories that I write, but also in films like this and assemblies like this, when we are gathered here today to remember those who've made the great sacrifice in the First, Second World War and other conflicts. And so, like with millions of British citizens descending from Commonwealth families in this country as well, it's so much part of our collective history. I think we really have to remember that, and I'm going to sort of talk about that during this video, particularly about an Indian airman who one of my books is about, and there's a memorial further downhill in this park that I want to take you to in a couple of minutes. So this is the Huddersfield War Memorial, and we're going to go for a little walk now, and we're going to go down to the bottom of Greenhead Park, where there's a memorial which means a lot to me and means a lot to particularly the Sikh community in Huddersfield and in this country. So come on down the hill and we'll have a look at that memorial as well. So we're heading down the hill now towards the other war memorial I wanted to show you, and the war memorial I want to show you further down the hill is specific to Sikh soldiers, airmen and sailors who took part in the conflicts alongside Britain. I think this is really important for me to do when I'm writing my books, to include characters from different parts of the world, different parts of the British Commonwealth. So the character I'm going to be talking to you about is from India, but also I have characters in my book who are from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and it's really important, as I've said, to include them as characters in our stories, so that remember that the First and Second World War were fought very much with the Commonwealth, not just Britain, but with Commonwealth soldiers, airmen and sailors. So we're just walking down the hill now, away from the big war memorial, towards the memorial to Sikh soldiers, airmen and sailors. So this is the memorial that I wanted to show you at the other end of Greenhead Park, which I'll talk to you about a bit later. But before that, because we're talking about Commonwealth soldiers and airmen and sailors, I wanted to read you a short passage from Resist, which is my new book, which is the story of Audrey Hepburn. When she was a child, Audrey Hepburn, the film star, lived in the Netherlands, and the Netherlands was occupied by the Nazis, and the Nazis perpetrated terrible crimes on the Dutch people. They took all their food, so many Dutch people starved. With Audrey herself, her brother was taken as a slave, her uncle was executed, and it was a very dark time, and war was raging over her towns and cities. For part of the war she had to hide in the cellar, not unlike the poor people of Ukraine are having to hide in the cellars now as war rages in many parts of their country. And we have to remember that, don't we, that war, we're remembering war and soldiers and airmen and sailors from the past, but these sorts of things are happening right now, and we have to bear that in mind. But what I wanted to do, I wanted to read you a passage from here, because as I was doing my research into the liberation of Holland, so the Netherlands was liberated by the Allies, and the Allies included the Americans, the British, and lots of other Commonwealth countries. And when I write my books, it's really important for me to represent all the different people who took part in these conflicts. And so I just want to read you about the liberation of Audrey Hepburn and her family. They've been hiding in their cellar for a long time. Eventually, it was morning again. Edda would go to wash in the kitchen sink and check all was well in the house. This was the only time she was allowed out of the cellar, allowed to use up her energy. Her mum had said it was safe so early, before anyone else was about. Edda lived for these moments. It was now mid-April. The air smelled sweeter and the mornings were lighter. In the garden, flowers were blooming around the edges of the lawn, though fewer than usual, as most of the bulbs had been dug up and eaten. Easing the door open to enjoy the spring morning, Edda smelled something different as she squinted into the bright sunlight. A sweet aroma, but not flowers, no, not flowers. Edda gasped. It couldn't be. She inhaled again and listened more attentively than ever. It was quiet, really quiet. The hairs on Edda's arm went up, and she knew. She knew instinctively it was over. Edda felt a sob come from her chest. Her eyes widened as a group of soldiers appeared round the side of the house. She stepped backwards, ready to shut the door and hide, and then she saw the soldiers were not dressed in grey, but in beige, and they were walking towards her, smiling. "Mom! Oppa!" Edda shouted at the top of her voice. "Aunt Misia, come now, come and see." The soldiers approached carefully, smiling still. They looked well fed, like the American airmen had. Not like the gaunt, ever thinner faces of her family that Edda had to look at every day in the cellar. There was a polar bear design on the arm of one of the men. Edda remembered Ian, her brother, telling her the Canadians wore polar bears on their shoulders. "Hey miss," the soldier called out, "do you speak English?" Edda stepped out onto the patio at the back of the house. "Yes, we all do," she said. "I'm English, sort of." "Well, I'm Canadian, and it's a pleasure to hear the voice of an English girl after all we've been through." Mum and Oppa and Aunt Misia were now behind Edda in the doorway, silent, wary. "Good morning, ladies, sir," the Canadian soldier said. "I'm pleased to inform you, you've been liberated." And that, for me, sorry, I'll just sort my leg out. That, for me, was really important, because when I read about the Netherlands being liberated, I read that it was as well as British soldiers and others, there were Canadian soldiers involved, and I wanted to put Canadian soldiers in there because the Canadian First Army was there and they did liberate that part of the Netherlands, and I'm really glad I did that, because those Canadian men came thousands of miles to liberate Europe, and some of them lived, and some of them unfortunately died, and they took that choice to do that, to liberate countries that were under the boot of Nazi Germany, the dreadful things that the Nazi Germans were doing to the people of Europe, and I'm really glad I did, because when the book actually came out, I started to get occasional emails and contacts through social media from people who were Canadian or who have Canadian families, and they said thank you. They said thank you for representing the Canadians in fiction, because a lot of fiction and films, British and American, doesn't feature the Canadians, and it's really important that we do that, and I'm really glad I did. And the next bit of the film, like, we're going to go a bit closer up to this statue and see who this is, but that's going to explain something else about another country, another part of the Commonwealth who took a huge part in the First and Second World War. So we'll go and check out who that is right now. So I'm in Greenhead Park, again in Huddersfield. We're now down at the bottom of the park. Up at the top of the park was the big war memorial, the cenotaph that we saw earlier, and this is a war memorial that's the bottom end of the park, and it's a memorial to it's dedicated to the memory of the Sikh soldiers of the British Indian Army. And this I've walked past this statue several times because a member of my family used to go to Greenhead College, which is just over the road there, and I was particularly struck by this as soon as I saw it, because I wrote this book, and this is a book I've written called Flyboy, and this is about a Sikh pilot in the First World War, a pilot who was desperate to fly with what is now called the Royal Air Force, and he really had to fight to be allowed to fly with the Royal Air Force, because initially he wasn't allowed to do it because he was Sikh, because he was of Asian heritage, and those people were not allowed to be in the Royal Air Force and the Royal Flying Corps, as it was called at the time. But he fought and fought and fought, and he became the first Sikh airman. And I found out about him when I was working at the Royal Air Force Museum. I'm the Royal Air Force Museum's children's writer in residence, and in the museums, they have one in London and they have one in Cosford near Wolverhampton. In those museums there are display boards, and I found out about Hardit Singh Malik, and Hardit Singh Malik was the guy that I based this story on. He was the pilot who did all those things that I've just mentioned, and he really struck me as a remarkable man, not just fighting in the war, but fighting to be allowed to fight in the war, and to do what he thought was right, to fight alongside other Commonwealth soldiers, airmen and sailors, and so that's what that book's about. So when I see this sculpture, I'm always really struck by it, and particularly for me, like at school I had a friend who was a Sikh who was called Jatinder, and I remember I went round to his house, I went to his sister's wedding, and he lent me books about the Sikh religion, and so this all sort of, when I see this statue, my memories of writing this book and of my friend at school really stir those memories. And also, like, when I go into schools now, I often meet Sikh children, and I like to tell them about this book, because again, I think it's really important that when we, the writers, write books about soldiers, about history, we write about the breadth of soldiers, airmen and sailors who took part in the conflicts from Britain, yes, and from different communities in Britain, but also from Commonwealth countries. And that's why I wanted to make that film here today, because of this statue. And before I finish the film, I think what I really wanted to do was read you a small passage of writing from the website of the organisation that commissioned and had this statue built, because I think it's really important to hear in their words. This is people from the Sikh community in Britain. To hear in their words why they wanted this to be here, and I think their words are beautiful. So there's a couple of paragraphs, and I thought I would read them to you, just to remember the Sikh men who took part in the First and Second World War, particularly with this one, with the British Indian Army, but also to remember men and women, soldiers, sailors, airmen from across the Commonwealth. Anyway, I'll read you what it says. Our Sikh soldier, our warrior in the park, now proudly stands on a plinth of strong, sturdy, durable Yorkshire stone, as he looks up towards the cenotaph, as he looks out to the world. And every day the warrior reminds us of the great numbers who fought bravely in Ypres, Flanders, the Burmese jungles, and in Africa for freedom and for justice. And he reminds us that the debt we owe to these brave combatants in all the armed forces cannot and never should be forgotten. Unknown to many, thousands of miles from their homes in the Punjab, many thousands of Sikhs came to Europe to join the fight against injustice and subjugation. This they were to do in both world wars. Thousands of Sikhs gave their lives so we could be free. Their legacy is worthy of remembrance. In the two world wars, Sikhs played prominent roles in the conflicts. The closest estimates report 83,005 Sikhs gave their lives. 83,005 gave their lives in the battlefields of the two world wars, with 109,045 wounded in battles across the world. And so that's why I wanted to bring you here, and that's why I wanted to reflect on Commonwealth soldiers as well as British soldiers on Remembrance Day today. Thank you very much for watching my Remembrance video 2022. I thought I would finish off by taking my poppy and leaving it with this at this memorial to say thank you to the Sikh soldiers who took part in the First and Second World War, and thank you to all the Commonwealth soldiers across the world who came across the world to help fight in the two world wars and other conflicts. I thought the best thing to do to end this video would just be to place this at the feet of this soldier. Thank you for watching, and all the very best to you and your school community and your families.